Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulihil Kareem. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. My name is Sajjad Chowdhry. Welcome to the Criterion Concepts Seerah podcast. Today we begin, inshallah, a series of discussions about selected stories from the Seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions radiyallahu anhum. With me is Assad Koshul, the founder of Criterion Concepts, who is also the curriculum designer and the lead facilitator. Assad is an accounting and finance professional. He's got expertise along with that area in organizational development, change management, leadership, and human capital development, reflecting experience and expertise in a diverse range of industries in both developed and developing markets. He is currently focusing on knowledge integration, concept and framework development for young professionals and activists. He also focuses on bridging the gap between academia and industry for young professionals, as well as curriculum and workshop development. So before we go into the Assad, welcome. Before we go into the discussion, can you please maybe address the audience and explain what's unique about the Criterion Concepts curriculum and the approach?
Okay, great. So, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatin min lisani yafqahu qawli. So, Assalamu alaikum, Sajjad, and to the audience. So, yes, we wanted to approach the Seerah from a little unique perspective. When we created a curriculum that was designed to teach critical thinking, situational analysis, and triangular thinking, and move away from binaries, yeses and nos. And we wanted to teach research the Seerah and evaluate the Seerah in a way that we can contextualize and contemporize. Because generally the Seerah is taught, one, through a chronological approach, or two, through an events-based approach, and three, a very sensational approach. And all of those approaches have their benefits. They have served the Ummah and humanity, but we felt that in order for us to contextualize and contemporize the Seerah, for it to operationalize the Seerah, it had to move to a critical thinking, situation analysis, and triangular analysis approach.
Can you talk about what triangular analysis or triangular approach is?
Great. Okay, so like one of the things that we wanted to do was, proverbs are important in all societies, okay? And we wanted to also create visual proverbs that would help embed lessons in the mind of the learner. Hence, part of what we're doing here is we use the Umar-ra series, we play clips on that series, and we've built lesson plans on the series.
Okay, so that's how your approach is structured around video clips, visual proverbs, as you just said.
And one of the most important visual proverbs we want to emphasize is that think in triangles, just not yeses and nos and halals and harams. In most cases, there are many times a third option, which is the ethical option, and is usually the best option, especially given the complexities of the modern world. Because if you see the world in black and white, if you see the world in yeses and nos, it becomes a very difficult world to navigate. Modern society is very complicated, so we wanted to, through the curriculum, also teach triadic thinking, triangular thinking, and visually think of a triangle.
Okay.
And every time you're looking at an event from the Seerah, yes, we understand those figures were great, their achievements are great, according to the historical record they were great, they were empire builders in many ways, etc. But for those lessons to be valuable to us today, it just could not be a sensational approach. It had to move to an analytical approach.
Right. So there's that saying, right? I mean, small minds focus on people, average minds focus on events. I'm paraphrasing. And then great minds discuss ideas. So I think there's some inspiration from there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Eleanor Roosevelt's quote, the First Lady of the United States. Small minds discuss people, average minds discuss events, great minds discuss ideas. So we wanted to develop a curriculum that focused on the idea. And because this is the thing, in order to strive, you need to be able to think about the relations between people, between communities, and most importantly, ideas. And and in there's tremendous amount of information available, but how do you link ideas? And we thought you cannot contextualize the seerah, you cannot contemporize the seerah if it's strictly an events-based approach. So we created a theme sheet and an analytical framework to look at the seerah from that perspective. So the way we built it is there are 40 themes under 4 different tracks, under belief, self, family, and society. And we try to say, okay, in this specific lesson, what theme do we see? Do we see discipline, deflating pride? We see family dynamics. We see negotiations. We see personality clashes. And that can then help the participant extract meaning for themselves.
So it's those themes and those ideas that emerge from the episodes that we focus on throughout the series that then you can contextualize and contemporize. Right, and apply them. Mm-hmm. So that goes back to what you said earlier. You want to focus here maybe as in comparison to other efforts to teach the seerah, which are all, as you said, very necessary and good. Mm-hmm. The idea here is to operationalize, and you can't operationalize until you understand what the idea is, what the drivers are, what the themes are, and then how you try to apply it here.
Exactly. So, we have a belief that, that generation was an extraordinary generation, the best generation.
Sure.
But continue to sensation, we should understand their greatness. We are what we are today because of them.
Sure.
Right? So we don't want to de-emphasize that. But what we want to say is to operationalize an idea, especially an ancient idea, you have to be able to contextualize and contemporize it. And what's the fundamentals in order to do that? One, you must have a deep understanding of the environment in which that idea emerged, the context.
Right.
And then you have to have a deep understanding of contemporary society.
Sure.
And then you say, okay, that ancient idea, for it to be contemporized, to be useful as a problem-solving tool, as an upliftment tool, as an intellectual enhancement tool, can only happen through an analytical framework. It cannot happen through a sensational framework, we think, and we don't think it can happen through an events-based or chronological framework.
Well, perfect. Let's sort of start on this journey. Mm-hmm. So for today's discussion, before Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khaṭṭāb became a giant of history, he was the second caliph and of course an early convert or an early entrant into Islam. He worked in nature. He was alone in the desert. He observed the animals that were under his watch. He took care of the responsibility that was entrusted upon him, and he learned how to manage the collective without losing the individuals that were part of his responsibility. So leadership doesn't necessarily begin in the palace. It begins with a lot of observation and a lot of deep reflection. So today what we're going to talk about is not the politics, it's about perception and how that perception shaped the mind and then ultimately the actions of one of our great leaders and one of the great leaders of humanity, really, Umar ibn al-Khaṭṭāb radiallahu anhu. So Assad will take us through how his experiences, Umar radiallahu anhu's experiences with nature, shaped the mind of one of our greatest leaders. Assad.
Okay. Yes, so when we look at the personality of this generation, and in this specific case we're going to narrow it down to just Umar radiallahu anhu. He was a very reflective person before even revelation. He spent extensive time in nature. He observed how animals self-organized. For them, a very important analogy for that society was the lone, the wolf attacks the lone sheep.
Right.
So if you stray off the away from the herd, that is very dangerous. Right. That's where the person is most vulnerable. And you can see how that analogy, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam starts his message, he appears to them at that time straying from the herd, from the belief system of the herd. So he's a very reflective person. And I think one of the challenges of the modern world is, you can meet someone who's 20 years old and they have never really seen the stars because they have never gone camping due to light pollution. And that's so one of the things to help strengthen character is to have some type of attachment to nature. Right? Like I was talking to one person who was he takes young men from the inner city, urban areas, camping, and he said something very interesting. He said, Assad, the impact that for a 16-year-old person who's never been camping to catch a fish, to season the fish and eat the fish, it's life-changing. So the importance of attachment to nature. And we see that these people are very attached to nature, to animals, to see how animals self-organize, the analogy of straying from the herd. Another major thing is, at this stage in Umar-ra-'s life, he's not really interested in politics. He's interested in thinking. He's interested even in economic empowerment. He wants to go into business. He wants to enlarge his animal herds. This is what he's looking at. And you can see his understanding of the natural world and how he can draw it to the human condition. Because he's a very reflective person, even being a young man.
He must have spent a lot of time alone.
In nature, overnight, with no pollution, and no technology.
And nobody to talk to.
And nobody to talk to.
Right. So he has to self-reflect and process the thoughts in a way that makes sense to him first.
Exactly. And what happens is, spending this much time in nature also heightens Umar-ra-'s human senses.
In what way?
And observation power.
In what way?
No, because you zero in. You're watching how even animals are. If you are in nature, and again, I don't have much experience in this myself, but from what I understand, you see lead animals. You see that even animals in a herd have their distinct personalities.
And it's interesting because you're watching animals who don't have language.
Exactly.
So you're interpreting all of this without linguistic cues, without words. You're just observing the actions right, of the animals.
You can learn some basics of group dynamics from observing a herd of animals. And Umar-ra is spends a lot of time in nature. And he sees this, and this is how he understands.
We know a lot of the prophets were shepherds, and so pretty much continuing that theme.
Exactly. Yep.
Right. So there is something haunting about the desert. I mean, we talked about this. We heard this from you. It strips you down. No distractions. It's just you yourself. If you have to process a thought, you have to make sure that it makes sense to you. So there's a coherence that you have to solve for. You can't tell yourself the same thing and not make and not have it make sense to you.
Yeah.
So you have to process the thought, again and again. So his reflections in the wilderness weren't idle thoughts; they were the beginnings of his awakening. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I would say yes. That his reflective thinking, even at this stage in his life, shows that he's a very thinking and analytical person, and he is not susceptible to easy emotional manipulation or outbursts. Right? He has to be convinced of something. He will not accept an idea just at the spur of the moment. He will not think. For him, it has to make logical sense. And some of these characteristics that he has in his personality are developed from being in nature, in isolation, and self-reflection.
So he is not reacting immediately. He is reflecting when he sees something and making sure that process of reflection makes sense to himself, and he can actually test that with the animals because he's observing them.
Exactly. And then in a larger context, and this is a key point, one reason we are not able to operationalize the seerah is also that in some of the ways that we were perhaps maybe taught in Sunday school, the Prophet ﷺ was Sadiq al-Amin, the truthful, and then when he declares his message, everyone knows he's the truthful, and they reject him. And that shows how bad they were, how evil they were, and how erratic they were. That is only partially true. These are smart thinking people. They do have
the Jahili Arabs.
Exactly. The Arabs, the pre-Islamic Arabs, they have an organization. They believe in ideas of social sanctity. They have principles with which they live by, right? They have strong observation power.
They had a moral code.
They had a moral code. So these were just not erratic, irrational people, right? That just out of the blue said, oh, well, we're going to reject him. Yes, they rejected him initially, definitely, right? But we should not say that they were erratic, irrational people.
one of my teachers actually once, we were having a discussion along these lines, and I asked him, why do so many people tend to want to write off that period of history as though it was something that we need to reject, right? It seems to me that they did have this moral code. They were highly sophisticated people. Of course, we know about their literature and their skill in storytelling.
Poetry,
exactly. So he actually said something, quite, which in that moment, really struck me. And he said they had hearts that were alive, because they were all, we're taking Umar radiallahu anhu as an example. Technically speaking, they were all exposed to nature in a much, much more profound way than we are.
Yes.
And so, they had that developed moral code, and they tested that moral code over centuries,
yes,
effectively.
Exactly. And then when you extend this to that, they believed in a creator.
Right.
They believed in the divine.
Right.
And they believed in these things.
And the Prophet ﷺ said, خياركم في الجاهلية خياركم في الإسلام إذا فقهوا. The best of you in Jahiliyyah will be the best of you in Islam if you understand.
Yes.
So there was something that they brought to the table.
Exactly, yeah. And that's something that really cannot be emphasized enough. We should not look at the pre-Islamic Arabs as erratic Jahili people who knew absolutely nothing. And no, they had a quote. There was a way that they conducted business. They understood in order to be successful businessmen, they had to avoid scandal.
The trust.
Exactly.
Had to build trust.
Exactly. And so that I think is one of the major reasons that we are not sometimes able to operationalize the seerah, because we write off their heritage and their moral code and the sanctity, the social sanctity that they believed in. Of course, they had some very bad practices and very evil practices.
Sure.
This is not what we're disputing.
Right.
But to just throw everything out is problematic.
Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Exactly.
So maybe if you don't mind, tell us a little bit more about nature as a teacher. What does nature do to teach us? Right? What is it, and how is it? Using the example of Umar radiallahu anhu, how was nature teaching him?
Yeah.
And how was he receiving those lessons?
Okay, great. Yeah, as we mentioned, so one, it heightens the senses. It heightens observation power. It heightens your connection even to the divine, because you see how miraculous nature is. So even in our world, we see a squirrel bury a nut, and then 3-4 months later, when it's winter or something, it can find the nut, and it doesn't have a GPS. Okay, and these are amazing lessons in nature to enhance intellectual capacity and spiritual strength. And so the big thing is, we can talk about light pollution, we can talk about noise pollution. We live in a time where there's very little time for self-reflection, and I can use the word meditation for lack of a better word.
And now it's the endless scrolling on the phone.
Exactly.
So that takes us away from nature. Even though, a lot of times you can sort of see nature on your screens.
Exactly.
But it's not the same thing.
Exactly.
Solitude, specifically, right? So we're talking about nature, and, the ulama talk about wahi as being not just in the form of a book, for us, the Quran, and of course all the revealed texts from before that, but wahi also having the form of nature, because these ayat are all around us, right?
Yes.
So talk to us about solitude. What does solitude do? Why do you need to be alone in nature? What is that doing for Umar radiallahu anhu?
Yeah, no, solitude also, again, since we're hyper-connected all the time, and there's a difference between loneliness and solitude. So we have to make sure we draw that distinction.
Okay, tell us about that.
Well, see, for example, now, you can have 500 Facebook friends, but they're not real friends. People that you may have seldom interaction with in real life. And that's one reason there's a loneliness epidemic. But solitude is important for a person to self-reflect. Like one of the benefits of COVID, you saw some people said when they were not going to work, they thought to themselves, is this really what I want to do for the next 5, 10, 15 years of my life?
Right.
And people made career changes because they had a time to be a little isolated, and they had a chance to self-reflect. Now, of course, we know the harms of for a lot of people, since they were in isolation, that it had an adverse effect.
Well,
So like anything.
That's the loneliness side of the spectrum.
That's the loneliness out of the spectrum. But it is important for a person, no matter how busy they are, to self-reflect, to think, thinking about thinking, what is actually even important to me? In the age of distraction, what is actually important to me?
Right, and you have umpteen books, you know, all the business and financial and success gurus out there. They will always tell you that you need to find your purpose, and you can't find your purpose if you compare yourself to too many people, which requires you to detach, think about things on your own terms, and then, you know, you bring in sort of select voices that will help you process that, but those are voices that you believe and know to be close to you.
Exactly. Yeah. So that, you know, and you know, we're not advocating a lifestyle of just detaching yourself completely from society and to move to the mountains, you know, but we are what we are arguing is it's important to be reflective. It's important to be deeply reflective, and that takes a lot of effort.
And that reflection, if, you know, before we move on to some specific questions that I have, when we talk about moral authority, okay, how does moral authority sort of develop or generate in that milieu where, again, you are spending so much time in solitude, right? I mean, maybe if you could sort of juxtapose the solitude that he had with the times that he may have been with people, because obviously he was with people, you know. I mean, he had his time in nature and in the care of the herds that he had, but there was also interaction with people. So how is morality developed in that context?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question, because see, man should be in harmony with nature.
Why?
Because, I mean, it's our belief system, okay, we are representatives of the Creator in this earth, right? And the earth the natural world is there for our use, but not for our abuse. And that was something I found very interesting, even when you study American Indian tribes. One of their concerns when they had some of these negotiations with the settlers at that time was they felt that the settlers would abuse the earth. And they found that sacrilegious. So respect for nature is very important. Deep thinking and reflection is important. And what you find with these people do this, like a modern example, let's take the example of Nelson Mandela. While he's in prison, what does he do? He thinks very deeply and even makes an effort to learn the Afrikaner's language. But you know, would he have been able to learn the Afrikaner's language if he didn't go to prison? You know, I wouldn't speculate on that. But I'm making an argument that even when he was in solitude on Robben's Island, he used the time to think deeply, reflect deeply, master the language, learn what he could about the guards and their culture, and that better equipped him eventually when he was released to lead a country.
27 years on Robben's Island.
Exactly.
So this is a great segue because you talked about you know, him learning language, and you were giving the example of Nelson Mandela. In the scene that we're talking about, right? Umar radiallahu anh talks about the animals that he is, you know, caring for and watching over. He almost talks as though each of those animals, despite the fact that they don't speak, he almost talks as though they have personalities.
No, he actually, at least from what I understand, he actually says each animal has this distinct personality, just like humans.
So what's the significance of him being able to do that?
Well, no, it proves his attachment to nature. It proves his observation power. Okay, if we see a herd of goat, right, we just see a herd of goats. But he sees, okay, which of the goats is the leader in the pack, right? And it's because of his training and his attachment to nature and his deep self-reflection, again.
So that attentiveness, that ability to basically discern personality types in animals that don't speak, right? That really don't even bear any resemblance to us. I mean, it's not like he's watching over you know, a group of gorillas or chimpanzees, which are closer to us than you know, than other animals. We're talking about camels, goats, etc. Right? So that ability, that attentiveness, that observation power, that, being in tune, how does that translate to his ability to lead human beings?
Yeah, no, so he understands being a guardian of animals trains him to be a guardian of people later in his life. Understanding how animals organize gives him, he begins to understand organizational development, not just through the social context of the tribal order. He also begins to understand organizational development through the herding of animals. So this is a major thing, and it gives him interpretive powers.
Interpretive powers.
Yeah, like he can interpret the relationship, right? And then he doesn't see things in isolation, right? For example, when he actually says the wolf is going to attack the lone sheep. So this is a very powerful lesson in that society, because if you are separate from the tribe, you have no tribal protection, your very physical safety is in danger. And he also understands this in a social context with the tribal social order, and he understands it within the context of animals.
Your physical safety, and it's actually your life.
Exactly.
Because in that case, the wolf attacks, and the sheep is gone.
Exactly.
Right.
And so this observation power that he develops, that's very keen and very sharp, right? He uses this later in his political career.
Any examples that you might?
Well, you see, Umar-ra was a very reflective person. So for example, for those of us who spent time in the corporate corridors of America, right? This is very important, right? You are even in intense negotiation. People are saying one thing, and their body language is saying something different.
Right.
Okay? And how strong is your power of perception?
Right. You need to be able to read all sorts of signs,
not just verbal,
at the negotiating table.
Exactly.
Right.
And you can see Umar, he understands this. Sure. He understands this from a very early age.
And then he deploys that.
And he deploys that. Not exactly in the context that, so we're using the boardroom. There were no boardrooms, but there were decision-making councils, for lack of a better word, right?
And he was deploying it, maybe just one thing before we move on, but he was deploying it, of course, when he was Khalifa, he was deploying it. Mm-hmm. But before he was Khalifa, he was also deploying it?
Exactly, yes. This is a lifelong endeavor. This is the point, that we're supposed to seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. So this is an ongoing process. So
Great. Well, I appreciate all the insights into Umar radiallahu anhu's experience. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about sort of where we are today, mm-hmm. right? Our current systems, mm-hmm. they don't really reward mm-hmm. Observation. Mm-hmm. They don't really encourage people to mm-hmm. take that type of time out, mm-hmm. right? How could we maybe encourage people to incorporate this type of training mm-hmm. into their lives, into their experiences, mm-hmm. for home, for work, for mm-hmm. For community work? Like, what kind of lessons can we draw from this, or rather, how can we operationalize it today? That's a better question.
Yeah, but I think one fundamental thing is, no matter how busy you are, you have to have time for self-reflection, because you can't improve without self-reflection. You need self-awareness, then self-reflection. And just the era in which we are in is we're generally constantly busy. Like, I know nobody who works 40 hours.
You're always connected.
Exactly. And then you have the other connections. So this issue of self-reflection, self-awareness and self-reflection is vital for long-term satisfaction and success in whatever is important to you. And so that's a key thing. So this is why when you go to Germany, what do people do to de-stress? They go to walk in a park.
So there's an image that stays with me. Umar radiallahu anh in the desert, in this clip, whispering to his herd, adjusting their pace, knowing each of these animals by their individual personalities. He didn't just lead them, he actually understood them. And later, when he led people, he remembered what he learned from this experience. So the reflection for this session is, what are the quiet, undramatic spaces in your life right now that you can go to, that you can retreat to, and what might they be training you for? Because there's greatness in each one of us. That's part of what God has given us. And to discover that requires those spaces. As you heard Assad highlight, this discussion is part of a series that we are doing to highlight a much, much larger program, which you can learn about at the website at the bottom of the screen. Visit the website. You can then sign up, enroll for the curriculum and the entire course, which is over 415
lessons.
415 lessons on the Seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, as well as the lives of the Khulafa Rashidun.
The Khilafat of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu and Umar radiallahu anhu.
So it's just those two Khulafa. In any case, join us for the next session, and we'll be talking about more lessons from the Seerah and the lives of the companions. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.